Imagine a teacher so controversial that the religious leaders of his time could not stand the company he kept, yet the broken, the rejected, and the forgotten followed him everywhere he went. That teacher was Jesus of Nazareth, and one afternoon, surrounded by crowds of outcasts and critics alike, he told a story that would echo through every generation that came after. It was the religious leaders, the Pharisees and the scribes, who triggered this moment. They were murmuring among themselves, deeply offended that Jesus was welcoming sinners and sharing meals with them. In their world, a holy man separated himself from the unclean. Yet here was Jesus, sitting with exactly the kind of people they had written off. So he responded to their criticism not with a lecture, but with a story. Jesus began by describing a father who had 2 sons. The younger son walked up to his father one day and made a request that would have been considered deeply offensive in that culture. He asked for his share of the family inheritance while his father was still alive. It was essentially telling his father that he wished he were already gone. Yet the father, without argument, divided his estate and gave the son what he asked for. The young man packed everything and traveled to a distant land, burning through his inheritance in a lifestyle of reckless and careless living. He surrounded himself with people who only stayed as long as the money flowed. Then a severe famine hit the land, and everything collapsed around him at once. His money was gone, his friends vanished, and he found himself completely destitute and alone in a foreign country. He ended up working on a farm feeding pigs, which was the most degrading position imaginable for someone of his background. He was so desperate and so hungry that he stared at the slop being fed to the animals and wanted it for himself. Nobody around him offered a single hand of help. It was at this lowest possible point that Jesus said something striking about the young man. He came to himself. He remembered his father's house. He remembered that even the servants there had more than enough food. He made a decision to rise up, go back, and confess everything. He rehearsed a speech on the way home, expecting nothing more than a servant's position. He had no illusions about deserving to be called a son anymore. He simply hoped for a corner to sleep in and a meal to eat. But while he was still a long way from home, his father saw him. The father had clearly been watching and waiting. He did not stand at the door with crossed arms. He ran. He threw his arms around his son, kissed him, and would not even let him finish his rehearsed apology before calling for celebration. A robe, a ring, sandals, and a feast were all prepared immediately. The father declared with full joy that his son who was lost had been found, and the one who was as good as gone was now alive again. A party erupted in that household that night, full of music and dancing. But then Jesus introduced a second character into the story who would shift the entire atmosphere of the parable. The older son had been out working in the fields. As he came near the house, he heard the music and asked a servant what was going on. When he was told his younger brother had returned and the father had thrown a feast, he was furious. He refused to go inside. His father came out and pleaded with him, but the older son unleashed his frustration. He told his father that he had served faithfully for years, never disobeying a single instruction, and had never been given so much as a small gathering with friends. His father responded with remarkable tenderness. He reminded the older son that everything he owned had always belonged to him. Nothing had changed in that regard. But his brother had been lost and was now found, had been gone and was now back. That alone was worth celebrating. Jesus ended the parable right there, without telling the audience what the older brother decided to do next. That open ending was intentional. Jesus was speaking directly to the Pharisees and scribes who were standing right there listening. They were the older brother in the story, faithful in religious duty but missing the heart of the father entirely. The sinners and the outcasts crowding around Jesus were the younger son, people who had wandered far but were now finding their way back to a God who had never stopped watching the road. The parable of the prodigal son is not simply a story about a rebellious child and a forgiving parent. It is a portrait of the character of God himself, as Jesus understood and revealed him. A God who does not wait with judgment but runs toward the returning. A God whose celebration over one restored life drowns out every argument about who deserves to be at the table. That message was radical then, and it remains just as powerful today. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.